My name is Professor Jeffrey Weinstock from the University of Miami, and I also teach at Sage Adult Learning. I'm excited to be moderating a virtual conversation with director Maurice Ben Mayor and editor Shauly Melamed from the movie Queen Shoshana, which is premiering at this year's festival. Thank you all for joining us. So let me ask the first question to Maurice, the director. I wanted to ask you, how did you get the idea to make Queen Shoshana? I mean, roughly 14, 15 years after Shoshana Damari died, why now?
Well, I think the answer is quite simple because amazingly, there was no movie made about her since she passed away and ever. And it was amazing for us to find out that no one had the courage to tell her story because she was such a big diva here in Israel. It was bewildering to just understand that there was never a movie about her. That was the first reason. But then when we started to research about her life and art, we found a great woman with a great story. And that's basically what the motive of making this film.
Absolutely. No, it's a wonderful story. It makes a wonderful film as well. We're going to talk about that, but I wanted to ask you another question. I'm going to ask you, and then I'm going to also ask Shauly, as someone who's a little bit younger, I think. So as someone maybe a little bit older than the typical Israeli watching the movie, Maurice, what is your generation's connections to Shoshana Damari today?
Well, both of us were different ages. He's much younger than me.
Yeah, as I said, so I'm speaking to you first, and then I'm going to ask him the same question.
Yeah. So, well, to tell the truth, I was never one of her fans because although I'm bigger than Shauly, older than him, and I grew up knowing Shoshana. She was on the radio, she was on TV, she was all around, but she wasn't my cup of tea music-wise. I mean, I was listening to pop music, to rock music. Shoshana Damari, for me, was a symbol of something of old times, very Zionistic singer, like an old icon. And I couldn't really relate to her music, but only when I grew up and I started really listening to her voice and to these marvelous songs, especially the first recordings with Moshe Wilensky and the orchestrations and everything, it drew me in, and I understood how grand she was. I mean, musically, the grand voice she had, her vocals, her vocal is just something so unique and strong. And also Moshe Wilensky's music that he wrote for her and his grand orchestrations that really, that took me immediately. So for me, it was somewhat a learning process, learning to love Shoshana. It didn't come at once. I think
so. Just to remind the audience who may not remember from the film, Moshe Wilensky was the slightly older man, the bald guy with the glasses, who was her composer. There's some insinuations in the movie that they were having an affair. They had a very long relationship. Let me ask you, before I turn to Shauly, Maurice, let me ask you, what about your parents? What was their connection to Shoshana? What was their relationship with her music?
Well, my own story is a little bit different because I was born in Bulgaria. And I'm an only child, and my parents came to Israel when I was 1 year old. It was 1967. The 6 Days War just started and ended after 6 days. And so they were never really into original Israeli music. They came from a different background. But through the years, especially my mom, started to listen to Israeli music, to Israeli singers. And I remember her always saying that she never heard such a voice like Shoshana's voice. Even though she came from Bulgaria, and as we know, Bulgarian women have great voices in those grand choirs of Bulgarian folk music. But still, she made that clear that she really loves Shoshana. My father didn't really, he wasn't in it.
But I mean, I think it's important to note, as you said, they were not there in 48. They weren't there in the 50s. They didn't go through that whole period as other Israelis did. Let's turn to Shauly, with your permission. And so for someone of your generation, before you started working on the film, what do you think Shoshana meant for you and your peers?
So for my generation, it's not quite different like as Maurice's generation. We know Shoshana Damari as an old icon, as a big icon. I knew her from the TV shows, you know, like she was everywhere. And the one thing that I like from a child view, I was amazed is by her personality, her charismatic personality, her eyes. She's talking by her eyes, you know, she have like a fire there. So Shoshana for me is first of all her personality, and then her songs and their music. Because for my generation, she's really funny lady and one grand diva, and mostly we know her as a musician from the work with Idan Reichel. This is the work that most of the young people here in Israel knows Shoshana from.
I must add that when Shauly talked a little bit about her personality, that was really captivating. I mean, for me, I wasn't really interested in her music, but when I saw her on TV, she has a great sense of humor.
Yes.
And coming together with her strength as a woman, she's a very strong woman, very opinionated woman. And so that was, for me, that was the first magnet, I mean, with her. I mean, even before I started to research her.
By my grandma was born in 1921 here in Israel. So she remembers her from like her childhood. They're both in the same age, Shoshana and my grandma. And for her, Shoshana is one of the biggest voices from the Yemenite women in the beginning of the country, when there was a lot of Yemenite singers, and Shoshana was the queen of them. So my grandma remembers her like the queen of Yemenite songs, and then Shoshana Damari that everybody knows. For her, this is the same old Shoshana Damari from 1925, or when there was both children.
Very, very beautifully put. And I think we're going to talk in a moment about the different factors that maybe contributed to her success, not only her grand voice, but her grand way on stage, and being Yemenite, how different that was at the time and how relevant that was, and Israel's attitude towards Yemenites and Mizrahi Oriental Jews as well. We'll talk about that. I wanted to ask you, let me turn to Maurice again. There's enormous amount of archival material. You have answering machine messages. You have very personal letters. Some of them are very difficult to hear. I wanted to ask you about the cooperation of the family. What was that like? How did you get them involved? And how did you get all that material, especially the answering machine messages? They gave me chills.
Yeah, well, that's a question basically that's for Kobe, my co-director together with me, that isn't here with us. But Kobe is a really stubborn guy, and he found a way to the family, and he asked them whatever they have to give us. I mean, photographs, posters, records, recordings. And they told him that all her belongings are stored in a warehouse in 2 big crates and that they are willing to open it with one condition, that there will be someone who will put it into an archive or a museum or something like that. So we made a connection with the Rishon LeZion Museum, and they opened the crate. And that moment was really moving for us, because for a documentarist to have an access to the belongings of someone, to the private belongings of someone, is a great gift. But altogether, it was a very awkward moment for us, because we opened the crate where her really secret and private life was there. I mean, even her clothes, you know, her slippers, the answering machine, the letters, private photographs, and we felt that we are entering a very intimate space, and that we have to draw a line that we shouldn't cross, because no one's alive anymore. Shoshana has passed away, her husband has passed away, her daughter has passed away, and except for her husband's family, there was no one remained. So no one really gave us the permission for how to tell the story. So we felt that we have a big responsibility, and that we have to draw this line, and that we must tell the story, but in a gentle and complex way, and not in a yellowish, gossipy way.
Not in a sensationalistic way.
Yes, not in a sensational way.
Absolutely. Shauly, let me ask you as the editor, I mean, there's wonderful archival footage of people listening to the radio and people shaving and all that. I mean, I imagine some of that footage is from Israel, some maybe from elsewhere. How did you come across that footage? How did you decide how to combine it? There's some old footage of New York, some lovely footage of New York, very old from the 50s and 60s. Where did you find it, and how did you conceive of putting it all together?
So honestly, it's not about the footage itself. So we don't like look up on footage and say we want it. It's like a script. We want like a scene that everybody in Israel will listen to Shoshana. So we start to build it from footage from YouTube, you know, and then we go to the archives and search from the exact footage that we want. But first of all, it's just like a scene from a narrative film that we want to create, but we just need archive footage. We use the YouTube for the first steps, and then we are.
Yeah, basically, I think the right way to put it is that we are using in these scenes, we are using archival material from archive banks of all sorts. Yeah. But we use it as an illustration for the story, and you know, you first put some shots from the New York in the 50s, but then Shauly had the idea of maybe we will find in these footages, we'll find someone walking with a radio in the street, and we will make this trick that people hear Shoshana, listening to Shoshana's voice in the streets of New York or in Hollywood or wherever.
It's not just like an illustration, which not like just using the footage, like Shoshana tells something about New York and then we are watching New York. We try to use the footage really as shots from narrative film, like we want to make the audience laugh. So we search for, like, if you remember from the film, that the moment that the American people listening to Shoshana in their house, and there is a moment, an awkward moment, that someone is switching the radio. So this moment was funny for us, and we thought if we will put like a Yemen song under, it will be a narrative scene from like an old movie. So this is how it's come. It's not like a regular illustration from a documentary.
Very, very evocative. It really does evoke that moment in time. It's very well done. I wanted to ask you a very quick question about the warehouse where all her belongings were stored. That warehouse is somewhere in Israel, of course.
Yeah,
right?
In Kibbutz Yakum.
Kibbutz Yakum. So why were her things so full of mold? I mean, it hadn't been that many years. Why were the things in such bad condition? The clothing and the letters and all that.
After all, this warehouse is a business, and they just put it all in crates, and they don't care about it anymore, unless you pay for it. You pay for just storing it there, and it grows mold, and
didn't mean nothing for them that Shoshana's Damari belonging. It's nothing for them.
And that also is as part of your first question: why making a movie about Shoshana? Because we felt during the making of, we felt that there is a big person here, that his story is untold, and that we have to remind the younger generation, or all of Israeli people or Jews all over the world, who was she? And that's our,
mission.
That's our mission in this film, amongst others, but it's very important for us.
Yeah.
And we feel like we really saved a big part of Israeli culture, and we put it out of the crates and outside to see daylight, and now it's going to be preserved and be shown in the Rishon LeZion Museum.
The exhibit is not open yet, correct? In the museum?
Not yet.
Yeah.
It will take,
I wanted to comment that at least on the print that I saw, the very last footage of them in the movie, there are two things written in Hebrew which were not translated. So I wanted to just comment on that for the benefit of the audience. One of the things is about the daughter, about Nava, and we'll talk about that in a moment, what happened to Nava. That's not translated. The other thing that's not translated is, as you said, that her belongings will now be in an important exhibition in the museum in Rishon LeZion where she grew up. And I think that's beautiful. And perhaps some of our spectators will be able to go visit it someday and see these beautiful things.
Yeah. I believe that it will be there in a year or so.
Fantastic. I wanted to ask you now about something which was very interesting. I'm personally interested in this. Shoshana talks a lot about how proud she was and how important it was in her career in Teatron Lilalo, this theater called Lilalo in Tel Aviv in the early 1940s. And she also talks about going to see Teatron Mitate, the Broom Theater. I wonder if you could talk a little bit. Some of our viewers might be aware of what these theater cabarets were and why they were important in Israeli society at that point in time.
Yeah, well, let's not forget that it's Israeli state wasn't really made yet. It was before 48. We're talking about a state that wasn't really born yet, but still there were quite a few Jews around, and many of them Russians, Polacks, and from Eastern Europe. That came and brought these skills of theater and cabaret and music and dance, and they started a whole new cultural thing here, because they brought their talents from over there, from overseas, from the Gola, but over here they made something new in Hebrew. That maybe the foundations, the artistic foundations, came from Europe, but over here they made something new, and they gave a chance, and they understood that a big part of the Israeli people are coming not from Europe, but from Yemen, from Egypt, from Morocco, and that this was also a part of Israel, of the newborn country. So, and a big part of its folk music. So these theaters were basically the first place that those voices were heard. And the combination of a Polak like Moshe Wilensky, that came from traditional music, European traditional music, and their shidduch with Shoshana Damari, which was a Yemenite girl. So it made a new magic, something new and something magical, and something that was only ours, only Israeli. And I think this was part of her appeal. overseas, in America, in Scandinavia, in Holland, in Japan, in Africa.
You know, sometimes I go through the city, and then I look to a little sign. Here was Lialo Theater. It's like a big building. No one knows that there the culture was started, and it's really emotion to be in those places. There is nothing over there, and we can mention also Shlomo, her husband of Shoshana, that he was invented like the first Shulamit theater, that he took Yemenite people and said for the first time, this is interesting to not Yemenite people also to watch this Yemenite show. It is interesting for you. Please listen. And this is the first time that someone said it here in Israel. And Shoshana was, she started over there in this Yemenite theater, and it's here, you know, it was in Yehuda Levi Street, but there is no sign over there because no one knows it. Really, no one remember this theater, but it was really, really revolutionary here in Israel.
And these people, basically, they were the pioneers that just made the foundations of the new Israeli modern culture. It all started from there on.
Yeah. And Shlomo took this little girl from Rishon LeZion, Yemenite girl that really was dealing with oranges all the day. This is was her work when she was a child. And he took her from Rishon LeZion and study her and teaching her, to eat ice cream on the street and to how to talk and how to move and how to say something, to become a lady and a singer and a queen.
Yeah, it's like a little bit like My Fair Lady story.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that as well. And, we'll talk a little bit later about some of the interpersonal dynamics between Shlomo and Shoshana, which weren't always ideal, far from that. But I thought a lot about that as well. An older man molding a younger girl into the model of what he wants her to be. And she had a lot of talent as well. So let's talk a little bit about two things I want to ask about. I want to ask about Vilensky and the relationship with Vilensky. Why do you think they were attracted to each other professionally? We can talk about the personal part or not, but professionally, why do you think that this match was so good? And I also wanted to talk about, the film doesn't concentrate on the period so much before she left for New York. She left around the late 40s, right? She says after the War of Independence, she leaves for New York for many, many years. I wanted to ask you as well to talk about the period during the War of Independence, singing for the soldiers, what it meant, what her status was in Israel during that period. If you could address those two questions.
Okay, so first we'll start with their relationship. As they said in one interview that we didn't edit it into the film, but there's a famous interview that they ask Shoshana, she sits there in the interview together with Moshe Vilensky, and they ask her, well, Shoshana, Mr. Vilensky, he made you a great singer with his music, with his great music and the collaboration, what he made you. And she answered, no, I made him. And this is a part of her sense of humor. And I think it's really mutual. I think that he found in her a voice that wasn't in him. And she found in him something that she couldn't do by herself. They were like minus and a plus. They were like they were a perfect combination. And we even heard one story that she told us, that there was a time that she came with a new song, with a new recording to her father, that was an old rabbi, and he heard it, and he said, "Wow, that's an old Yemenite song that I know from Yemen." And she told him, "No, this is Moshe. He wrote this." So that shows us how deep the connection was, and how Moshe Vilensky understood the Yemenite music and the Yemenite folk and folklore and and how she understood the old classic traditions of his music. So, and what was the second one?
The second question is, it's a big question about what happened with Shoshana in the 40s. She's married, she's a young mother, and she's singing for the troops. I mean, what was her status in Israel before she left?
She started to becoming famous here in the 40s. There is like 4 or 5 Yemenite famous singers. There is Esther Gamlieli, was really famous over in those time also. There is Bracha Tzfira, that his son is Ariel Zilber, he's a known musician here today. But Shoshana was something special because she was Yemenite and can sing a Yemenite, but she was something American also. You know, she was a Yemenite diva and not like a Yemenite singer.
And beautiful.
Yeah, but she had a role over on those times. She needed to go to the war and sing to the soldier. She had one famous story about the 48 war that she was sang to a group of soldiers. And then she came home and heard in the news that everybody was dead. And she read in the newspaper that all the group that she was sang to them was dead. So I know it was really, really important for her to sing in front of the soldier. In the film, we will dealing with it in the 73 war, in Yom Kippur war. Just because from Yom Kippur we had much more material, archive material, and than 48. And we wanted to create like the success of Shoshana internationally quite fast in the film, and then talk about the wars.
Another thing, I think that in those times when you were on stage already, there was a sense of mission.
Yes.
As I said before, they were just forming the new cultural voice of Israel. And every one of them, it wasn't unique only for Shoshana. It was with actors in the Habima Theater. It was with other singers. They all felt like they're on a mission, and they represent the new state, the new country.
There was no I, there was always we.
Yeah,
we as a group.
There was us and not me. They weren't singer-songwriters. They were recruited for a bigger mission, for something bigger than just telling their own story.
But I think that connecting to the previous question, that Shoshana found in Vilensky more than just those war songs or victory songs. She found in him love songs that she can connect and relate to them, and she found like a wall that she can sing it, and not only we are the victories and songs like that.
Lisa, thank you for clarifying. I want to talk about her years overseas in a moment, but before we do that, I wanted to ask about perhaps her most famous song. One of my favorite songs of Shoshana. It's featured very prominently in the film, and even at her funeral, you see. And of course, we're talking about Kalaniyot, translated in English as anemones, beautiful red flower. Can you talk a little bit about the significance of the song then, and if it has any significance to the younger generations today? What did that song mean for people?
First of all, there's a story about it that apparently it wasn't true. The story that the whole Israeli people know about it is that at that time there was the British mandate here, and the British troops walked with red berets, and it was considered as somewhat kind of a protest song against the British troops, and it was even forbidden to listen to it. From our research, we don't really know if it was like that or if it's a myth that was told later on. But apparently there are quite a lot of people here in Israel that tell this story over and over again. So even if it's a lie, you know,
Morris, then if it was, let's assume that that's true. If it's true, then why is the song so beloved? And whenever she would sing it in a concert, the whole audience would sing along with her. Why was it so beloved if it was a protest song against the British mandate?
First of all, the music itself of the song is so, you get hypnotized by the music and her voice. I think that it's the ultimate Shoshana.
And it's one of her first songs. Like the audience met her with this song.
Yeah, it was her first grand hit, and together with the voice and the music of Zelensky, it was like not a one-hit wonder, but something that stays on. And even today, when we listen to Kalaniot, it means a lot to Israeli people. It's really a good song.
Yeah, I think it talks about a lifetime, you know, about a woman that she becoming an old lady, and this topic is not a political or protest. Everybody can relate to these words of this song, you know. So I think this is the secret of this song, that it's kind of protest. Maybe it's a myth, maybe it's not, but inside of it, it's a great song about our life, you know. So it was really a good one.
I agree, and I think also, and I think the audience will agree, that not only is it beautiful melodically, I mean, it just, the melody sweeps you away, but also for those Israelis who either were alive during that period when it first came out, or grew up in the, let's say, the 60s and 70s and remember her performing it, it's enormously nostalgic. There's a beautiful, you know, nostalgic component, and everyone loves nostalgia in some way or another.
And she recorded it. I think we listened to more than 40 different recordings of this song throughout the years. And every time she does it better and better and better. So
did you ever hear any reports that she got tired of singing it?
Never.
No.
Never. She was even asked in a few interviews what's her beloved song, and she always says that it's this song, Kalaniot.
Let's talk about her leaving Israel in the late 40s, early 50s. So I think the audience will have a question. She was gone for a long time. If you could talk about how long she was really mostly based in the US, firstly. And second of all, I think the audience might have a question. Why didn't her husband and daughter go with her? Why did they stay in Israel? Those are the two questions I think on people's minds.
I'll start. Well, we don't really understand the real timing of things. We know that she came to New York at 48 together with Zelensky, and they started touring, and this tour was very long.
2 years straight for the first tour, but then she came back to Israel for a few months and back again. And she not only toured the US, she toured all of Europe, as I said before. She got to Japan, to South Africa. But we can
America
say
also.
That she moved to the US in 48 and lived it like to Israel in 73. From 73, she lived in Israel.
Yeah, but there was a period of time where her daughter joined her.
Yeah,
and she learned in a musical school in New York, and that was also something like 2 years or some.
Yeah, it's inside those years. The daughter came for a while, and
from what we understood from the letters and diaries, is that and that's the big dilemma of the movie actually. Is what's more important for her career or her family life? And I believe that when you see the movie, the answer is it might look like her career is more important, and she took a choice. She made some choices in her life that maybe were a little bit sad and tragic in the end. But I believe that she couldn't do it any other way. She was addicted to the stage and to singing, and that was her true meaning more than anything else. So that might answer your question, and why she toured so much. And
she was a feminist without understanding what it means to be, just because she wanted, she felt it, right? You know, so she didn't understand why she need to choose, why men don't need to choose and she needs. So she didn't choose. She did both of those lines, the family and the career.
I mean, she, in some of the interviews that are in the movie, she's asked point blank, very directly by the interviewers, you know, wouldn't it be easier to just stay? Wouldn't it be better to just stay at home with your daughter and your husband? She said, I could never do that. The career is, my career is really important to me. And she admits it straight out. I mean, the letters that are read by that lovely young actress, you know, simulating the daughter's voice at age 6 or maybe age 8 or 9 or 10, they're heartbreaking. They're just heartbreaking. The daughter writes how she cries all night and misses the mother. Why do you think the husband didn't go with the daughter? Why didn't they just all move there together?
That's a very complex question, and I don't believe that we really have the answer for that.
But if I need, so the husband had a career himself, of himself. So he had a lot of business here in Israel. He was like a Batsheva,
impresario.
Yeah, and he did a lot of things here in Israel.
But I believe that he also made his choice. He understood quite in the beginning that Shoshana is really big and that there is no place for another one being beside her and being big as her. So they can't be together at the same level. So he just made this choice of living under her shade, you know, under and supporting her. He really loved her very much. I believe that this is the ultimate question, ultimate answer for your question.
There's a beautiful letter that you shared where it's a letter. He says he wrote this 8-page letter to her, but he never sent it. When he heard about the supposed affair with Vilensky, he wrote this long letter, but he never sent it. He kept it in his pocket.
Yeah, because he knew that he might lose her in a way, and he didn't want to.
So speaking of Vilensky, what caused the rift between Vilensky and Shoshana in the end? Why did they separate in the end? Why did they no longer work together?
I think that basically it was a very intense working together, touring together, and two very strong personalities. He was a very demanding person music-wise. She was a very demanding person with her own character, and he felt, as he says in the movie, he felt that he could never write a song for another singer, that he's like trapped in this thing with her, only with Shoshana, and he like felt that he has to break this these chains and start to be independent in a way. I think that there was more to it than just that.
Yeah,
there was this affair. I believe that it was a one-sided affair. It wasn't really a love story between two people. It was, as we see it, it was one-sided from his side. He was really in love with her. I don't know how much she was in love with him, so that makes the story more complex. And he was already married with another woman, and he had his own life, so he had to make to choose.
But Shoshana didn't want to choose one person. She could choose Shlomo in her early days and go all the way with Shlomo, like the story of Ofra Chaza, another Israeli Yemenite singer that had one impresario all the way. And this is the complex in her story. But Shoshana didn't choose. It's Shlomo, after it's Vilensky. But when she didn't want Vilensky anymore, she moved on. But Vilensky was a bit frustrated because of this.
Let's talk about, there's a beautiful episode in the movie, which may or may not be familiar to many of our viewers. And I wanted you to give some historical context to that, please. And that's about Shoshana going to Cyprus and singing for the Jewish detainees there. Could you talk a little bit about why there were Jewish detainees there, what period it was, and what it meant for them, for Shoshana to go there?
Well, it was just before the Israel was born,
Just
and
after the Holocaust.
just after the Holocaust, and there were many Olim that wanted to come to Israel. They all came from the horrible Holocaust, and the British mandate didn't let them in,
Mhm.
so they put them in the detainees camp in Cyprus, and so Israelis from here went over there to like somehow comfort them with their songs, and that's how she got there. She was there for 2 weeks, I think.
Yeah, she was there twice.
She was there twice, and there are still people who remember these
Yeah.
shows, and we chose to tell this story not in the timeline of the movie, not where it really takes place in the beginning of the movie, but when she gets the Israel Prize. And she comes on stage, and then she has a flashback of these shows that she performed in front of those people there in Cyprus. And because this is actually, by doing that, I think that we're telling how important it was for her to be written in Israeli history as an Zionist icon, more than just the girl who sings Kalaniot.
But for a lot of Holocaust survivors, Shoshana is not only a singer; she is a symbol for hope, for some, something from the new country that came over and tell them that come over, and there
We're
is
waiting for
a
you.
light
We're
in the
waiting for
end.
you.
Yeah, there is
we're
a light
waiting.
in the end of the road of
Yeah.
you. So
It's a beautiful sequence in the movie. I'm very glad that you decided to put it in. Let's talk a little bit about just a few more questions. You talked a little bit about how Shoshana had this desire to be recorded in history as an icon, as part of the formation of the new state. And many of our viewers may be familiar with another singer from that period, a little bit younger, but almost the same age, who was Yafa Yalkoni, right? And also, in many ways, had a similar career. Sang these patriotic songs, sang for the soldiers, went overseas for a while. Also a grande dame, different than Shoshana, but also a grande dame. How do you compare them, and why do you think each of them has a different place in Israeli history?
Well, they're both called, they're both named war singers, Israeli war.
But
the
Shoshana
greatest...
always say, I'm a peace singer, not war singer. She's the war singer. I'm the peace singer.
Yeah, well, I think that when you listen to Yafa Yarkoni's songs and compare them to Shoshana's songs, it's a whole new, different thing. Yafa Yarkoni is more tango-ish. She's more poppy in a way. And she's more American, to tell the truth. She's the melodies, the way she sings, she's singing. She was not so dramatic like Shoshana. She was not so
sang very quiet. She sang very quietly, actually, much more quietly than Shoshana.
And so we can't really compare. There was always a comparison between the two. And from what we found out, it was only the invention of, it was something that journalists made up. Like there was some kind of something wrong, like she was the nemesis or something of Shoshana. There wasn't such a thing. They were good friends. And there's a part where Shoshana dies in the end of the film, and we see her funeral, not her funeral, but in the Camry Theater, they put her the casket, and people are passing by it. And we thought of putting this small part where Yafa Yarkoni stands in front of the casket and puts a bouquet of kalaniot on the casket. But we decided not to do it because our first decision was that in this movie there will be no Yafa Yarkoni, because we don't like to make this comparison, and out of pure honor to both of them. We didn't want to say anything about the comparison between them. We just wanted to leave it like that. This is Shoshana's story. In a different movie, maybe we will tell Yafa's story.
Yes, this was a nice story for that period, but it wasn't really a big deal in both life, you know. There was kind of friends, two singers, but if you ask me, there is no competition because Shoshana like brought to America Israel, and Yafa tried to be an Israeli American in America, and Shoshana was with enough courage to say, I will sing in Hebrew on American stage, and I won't change my language. You will change yours to understand me. And so honestly, I think that Shoshana is much bigger an artist than Yafa, but this is only my opinion, and you know, everybody got one.
That's a great answer. I have two more questions for you before we conclude. I wanted to talk about the relationship with Wilenski towards their lives. And there's a beautiful scene, there's an interview with them together. There's a little bit of awkwardness perhaps, but right following that interview, that clip, you talk about when Wilenski dies. And she says very beautifully, very movingly, they call me the queen of Israeli music. Today, I lost my crown. So I wonder, I mean, it's a beautiful sentence, etc. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what if you know, what their relationship was at the end of their lives.
They had to meet each other because they were invited to many television shows.
He wrote all her songs.
Yeah,
all her songs.
They had to meet each other, and I think that the basic sympathy and love and connection that was in the beginning when they were young, it stayed. It remained even that when they were older.
Yeah. I think
when he died, it's like he died after her husband died.
Yeah.
And she was already older also, and
they forgave each other.
We get softer when we're getting older.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and she always felt that nobody can write to her. She always said that, who I got today, there is nobody that can write to me. But then came Mati Caspian success and succeed, and Idan Reichel, and she found somebody new.
Let's talk a little bit about Idan Reichel, and then I want to ask you a question about the daughter. So some of our viewers will certainly be familiar with Idan Reichel. He's played all over the world. He's played in Miami a number of times with great success. But for those who are not familiar, can you talk a little bit about how important he was at that moment in Israel and why his collaboration with her, his choice of using Shoshana Damari was so significant at that time?
Well, I think that this was his first record, wasn't it?
Yeah, or the first or the second?
Or the first or the second, where he collaborated with Ethiopian singers. Mm-hmm. And I think that Idan's musical education is very rooted in Israeli music, in classical Israeli music. And the choice to work with Shoshana Damari for him, from what we know, was a great honor. It was like, it might be the last chance to work with her, with such a grand person. And he really knew how to appreciate her legacy, her musical legacy. He understood her musical legacy in depth, and Moshe Wilenski's legacy. So for him, it was like really the last opportunity to do it, and it became successful because his unique sense of melody and the way he works with other kinds of folklore music, mm-hmm. Combining it also like Wilenski with Western elements in melodies. And therefore it became very well known and a big hit. And for her, it was the greatest
Adran, how do you
Adran,
say?
no.
Encore, encore.
Encore. But in those time, Dan Reichel was the new voice of Israel, the new music. If we had Arik Einstein and Shlomo Artzi, everybody said from his first album that he is the new prince of Israeli music, and he combining the new Israel, the new Ethiopians in Israel, all the different cultures here in Israel. Reichel combined them in one person, in one project, and so for him to choose Shoshana, he gave my generation, the new generation, to know her.
I think it's a great point that you both made. I don't think we should take it for granted that a young composer would specifically appreciate Shoshana Damari in the early 2000s and choose to use her on his album. It's an amazing thing that he did, right? It's not just to be taken for granted.
And it's vice versa. It's an amazing thing that she agreed to, because she was a really tough lady.
Yeah, and he was with the dreadlocks, and she didn't know anything about him. And she said, her first reaction was no, I don't want. But she heard about him, and she was really, when she was old, she was really watching the TV all the time. So she knew him from the TV.
She was updated.
Yeah.
She was updated, and she had good sense of,
Yeah.
And she also, I believe that she told herself, she had a conversation with herself saying, if I should do one last thing, I better do it with him and not with anyone else.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. That's beautifully put. Let's end the conversation, gentlemen, with a discussion of that very moving last sequence at her memorial, when her daughter Nava comes from Canada and sings a very famous song, Hayu Leilot, my favorite Israeli song of all time. Made me cry a little bit when I watched it. And Idan Reichel is playing the piano. Why do you think she specifically chose that song?
Because it's when you hear the lyrics, it was just written about it's like a farewell song from the old world, from old times, from old Israel, and basically it's a farewell song. It's a remembrance song, and I believe that if I'm not wrong, it's one of her first recordings
of Nava.
Of Shoshana.
Maybe with Nahum Nardi. It's before Vilensky. It's songs that wrote to her before Vilensky.
Yeah, it's one of her first recordings of Shoshana, and she made it. Although the more famous version is of Esther Ofarim.
Yeah, it was a lot of singers.
Yeah, but Esther Ofarim's version is the very
the classic version. Yeah,
classical version. Yeah. But Shoshana, if you listen to it, you can find it on YouTube. She sings it great, so moving.
Yeah,
and I think that she chose that Nava. I don't really know because we don't have Nava around anymore. So,
but I remember when we heard about this scene, when in the start of our road of this film, we heard that Nava in the funeral came on the stage and sang something, and we even watched like a really short clip, and we knew that we need to get this video. And I walked to the archive of Channel 1 of the Kan 11, our channel, how do you say? The Israeli broadcast. And I found it over there in one cassette. And it's our miracle, because this moment is making us cry every time we are watching this film. Nava wasn't like a person of words, she came and talked by this song. She said everything about everything with this song, and you don't need to ask nothing about after it.
Not to forget that it's after 20 years that she wasn't in Israel at all. She lived in Canada. She comes to the funeral.
And the way she is standing on the stage, the hands, Shoshana's always did this with the hands, and Nava is standing with the hands behind her back.
It's like a negative of Shoshana. It's like the just the opposite of Shoshana.
But somehow it's the same. It's also the same. You're feeling that it's kind of Shoshana is singing.
I mean, I would even say that earlier in the film, when there's a recording of Nava singing Que Sera Sera, she sounds just like Shoshana as a little girl. The voice is almost identical. But I think to sort of wrap it up, that scene at the memorial is so powerful, not only because of it's a daughter singing for her mother who's just died. That would be powerful in any way. You have the symbol of Shoshana on the wall. You have kalaniot. You have these red anemones on the wall, which is so beautiful. You have her new partner, musical partner, Idan Rachel, on the stage as well, who loved her and appreciated her. And we also know, having seen this movie, the complexity of the relationship between Nava and her mother. And despite all that, she comes on stage and she sings this song about the past, about saying goodbye to the past, but holding on to the past at the same way. And the emotion is very real. So I want to really thank you for putting that in. I thought it was just beautiful. I do want to comment that before we end, that there is one other thing that's not translated, at least in the print that I saw, which says that after her mother died, Nava returned to Israel and lived in Israel, and then she passed away in around 2012, leaving no family behind her.
That's true.
Right.
So the last thing I wanted to ask is the very last question. If there's one lesson that you'd like the viewers to take away from this film, one thing, what is that one lesson?
Only one? Wow, that's a really tough question. There are many lessons from this film, but I think that what I'm taking for myself is being loyal to yourself is very important, even though you have to pay a price for that. Because not being loyal for yourself, you'll pay a bigger price. And I believe that Shoshana, although she paid a price for being loyal to her own way and herself, I believe she chose right. She did right. That was her, and she couldn't do anything else, and I admire her for that.
Yeah, maybe I take from her the self-confidence, the healthy self-confidence. Sometimes when I'm a bit off, I can load Shoshana into my mind and go to the work, because she was a fighter, she was a fighter. Nothing can stop her, nothing. And this is really, really strong personality that we admire.
Yeah, I agree.
Beautifully said. And I think that we all can not only admire the beautiful film that you've made and shared with us, and we're so grateful for that, but also admire the personality that many of us have learned more about through your film, that personality of Shoshana Damari. So thank you again.
I just want to remind that we have another partner, which is not here with us, Colby Faraj, a very talented director. We work together, the three of us. That's already our fourth film, and we're moving on and making more movies.
Yeah, and he's in the cinema right now. Talk to the audience, so he can't be with us.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, thank you for mentioning Kobe. I want to say thank you again to director Morris Ben Mayor and to editor Shauly Melamed from the movie Queen Shoshana for joining us today. Once again, I'd like to thank you, all of our members, our sponsors, our community partners, our volunteers, all of you film lovers, and especially our presenting sponsors, SAGE, the Center for the Advancement of Jewish Education, and the Greater Miami Jewish Federation for their continued support throughout all these years. And thank you to our audience for participating in the 25th Annual Miami Jewish Film Festival.